All right, guys. So, hey, we'll go ahead and get started. As people file in, they can just join as we get started. But let's do this. My name is Ben Kelly. I will be teaching this class, Christianity, Critical Theory, and Cultural Marxism, Worldview Analysis. So let's do this first. Let's start with a word of prayer, and we'll jump into this subject, and we'll go through what we need to for tonight. So if you would, just bow your heads with me, and let's go to God in prayer before we start talking. So dear Lord, we thank you so much that we live in a time and a place where we are free to study your word, to study what we believe as the philosophical foundation of our faith. We pray that you would use me tonight as just someone who would speak truth, who would be empowered by the Spirit, that you would open our minds to learn, but not just learn, that we would be changed by this, and that we would go out on mission, because the purpose of all of this, Lord, is to use this to reach our neighbors. And we pray that this would be edifying, it would be good, it would be pleasing to you, and we would love you and worship you more for it. We pray all these things in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so Christianity, Critical Theory, and Cultural Marxism. I'm glad that you all have joined this class. This is a worldview analysis class of my making. I asked Pastor Rick back in the spring if I could create a class like this. He said, go right ahead. So here we are. So I'm going to introduce myself, give you a little bit of my background so that you know me. And unfortunately, because we're doing this online, I really can't give us time to where you can introduce yourselves, even though I want to get to know you more. But as a general housekeeping rule for this class, the way that we're going to do this, when you log on here and you get connected on this Zoom class, what we're going to ask everybody to do is to mute their microphones and to keep those muted the entire class. And the reason why is they cause disturbances. It's distracting. And what I want to do, I'm going to be doing a lot of lecturing and going through slides, but also there is opportunity to do Q&A. And so when we get to those times when we ask questions, the way that I have seen it work best in like a university or a seminary setting is that it would be best if you type your questions into the comments section, the thread for the whole group. And that way, Pastor Rick is actually going to go through the comment section. He's going to sift through those questions. And then he's going to, when I break for questions, he's going to be the one to ask those questions for you. And then I'll be able to answer it. That way, we don't get any feedback. We don't get a lot of disturbances and distractions. It can be very smooth. And Rick will be your voice to me so that we can talk and we can communicate, but we're not creating distractions. So keep that in mind. Keep the microphones muted all the time. And then if you have questions, please type them in to the group thread, the comment section, because we're going to be dealing with some issues that, and we're going to be dealing with some vocabulary that probably some of you have never heard of before. This is a class that's going to be looking at some elements of philosophy. And in my experience, a lot of people just don't have a lot of knowledge or experience in philosophy. It's kind of one of those more nerdy things to do. So let me introduce myself to you so you all know who I am. And please come and say hi to me on Sunday morning, because I would love to get to know you. I'd love to answer any questions you have about this stuff. I'll send you my personal contact information so you can ask me questions. But my name is Ben Kelly. I'm a member at Sacred Mission. If you were there on Sunday, you saw me preach. I have been I attend with my wife and my kids, and we have been members there for almost a year now. I was actually a pastor of Missio Dei Church for about 5 years. Missio Dei is the church that planted Sacred Mission. And about 2 years ago, I stepped down from that role so that I could pursue education to go into vocational ministry. And right now I'm enrolled in the Masters of Divinity program at Liberty University. My main concentration of study is Christian apologetics. For those of you who don't know, apologetics is the study of how to answer and dialogue in questions by non-believers who have questions about the faith, who have objections to the Christian faith. As an example, last semester I took an entire course on the objections to miracles, particularly the resurrection of Jesus. And so that whole class was built around how do we answer non-believers' questions and objections to the resurrection. And so topics like that are my primary focus of study in school. And I found that they have that kind of studying has great benefits for having conversations with people, helping people think through things, but also coming up with a class like this. A lot of the church right now, and I'm sure this is the reason a lot of you are on this class right now, is you have questions about critical race theory. You know, you want to know what is cultural Marxism? What do we do with the critical social justice movement? You have all these questions. My background has specifically trained me to deal with some of this in kind of a worldview setting, which is what we're going to do here. So that's my background. I also have an undergraduate degree in English literature. That really doesn't mean anything for this, except, you know, 15 years ago when I was in college, I saw this stuff and I experienced it at an academic level. I didn't know what it was at the time, but now having read the books on it, I understand this a little bit more, and I could see it 15 years ago. A lot of people don't understand that this stuff like critical race theory is way older than just the last few years. It's been around for almost 50 years. And the thinking that led to it, the philosophy that led to it, has been around much longer than that. And so my goal in this class is to help you think through some of these things. And my education, thankfully, has helped me gain an understanding of that. So that's who I am. You know, I love being at Sacred Mission, and please approach me. If you don't know me, I would love to get to know you. I don't know everyone. I know all the people that used to go to Missio Central, but I don't know a lot of you on there. So please approach me when you do see me at church on Sundays. So tonight, what we're going to be talking about, we're going to do a few things. What I want to do is I want to first talk about why are we doing this class, because I think we need to talk about why I felt the need to do this class, but also why I think you might be coming to this class. One of the things that I want to put out there right away is that this class, the purpose of this class is that we are going to develop tools. We're going to develop intellectual tools for the proclamation of the gospel and for missional living. If we are not going to use the stuff that we learn in this class for those reasons, for that purpose, then I really have no interest in doing this class, all right? Because the gospel is why we do anything that we do. You know, that is our purpose in life. Jesus told us to go out and to make disciples, to preach the gospel, to teach them everything that he taught us. And so when we go into a class like this, we want to be sure this is not just head knowledge. This is not just something that is a bunch of good facts that we can store and that we can know some interesting things about some philosophers a long time ago. We want to use the ideas and the tools that we'll learn here so that we can preach the gospel and we can live missionally among our neighbors. And the thing about this class is that even though we're going to talk about Christianity, we're going to talk about things like critical theory and cultural Marxism, the tools that you learn here, they're not just for those two types of worldviews. You can use these tools for any type of worldview that you come across, whether it's a person who's an atheist, whether it's a person who's Hindu, maybe you know someone who is Muslim. you can use these tools for any type of worldview out there. And this is particularly a good thing for Sacred Mission Church, which is located in Mason, Ohio. This is one of the most diverse areas in all of the state. You know, you have many different world-class businesses in the Cincinnati area, but obviously P&G being in Mason, you have many different cultures, many different kinds of belief systems, all coming and converging together into Mason, Ohio. And using these tools is a good way to make conversations, to meet people, to have those deep questions, to challenge their worldviews and really preach the gospel and live missionally. And that's why we want to, that's first and foremost why we want to do this class. The second reason that I really want to champion here is that we live in some really confusing times right now. One of the big reasons I did this class, why I went to Pastor Rick and asked, hey, can I do a class like this, is that, you know, for 6 months almost every week, someone at church who knew me would come up and say, hey, I got a question about this, or what do you think about this? And it would always be something in the realm of like critical social justice or critical race theory. And I talk about it, and having a little bit of a background in philosophy, I felt qualified to answer those questions. But the goal here is to educate you and to offer clarity. We believe in a God who is clear and who is logical. Although we don't talk about him that way all the time, that's what he is. He is reasonable. You know, he doesn't contradict himself. And what we get out there in the culture right now is there's just a lot of confusing language. There's a lot of contradictory stuff going on. And there's a lot of different aspects of this new worldview we're seeing, which I am calling the new critical worldview. There's a lot of different things that play into it. And we kind of want to differentiate it and see how is it broken up into parts and how does it all come together. A lot of people have a question about critical race theory or intersectionality as an example, and those are only really very small parts to a much larger worldview out there. And we want to be able to take a step back and look at the larger worldview of what's going on. And as an example of that, like as critical race theory is, it's important and we talk about it, it's a big issue here in America. You know, it's not as big of an issue in places like Canada, for example, or the United Kingdom. And the reason why is their struggles with racism aren't as recent as ours. And so, but they're dealing with similar issues having to deal with sexuality and gender. And they're all built into the same worldview. They all operate the same way. They're all coming from the same philosophy. And so the goal of this class is then to educate you and offer clarity to be able to step back and look at all these moving parts and see it for what it is. And then the last reason, I mean, and if you heard my sermon on Sunday, we want to train the mind, convict the heart, and use the hands for ministry. That's why we're doing this. That's why, you know, I was so passionate about we have to use these tools for the proclamation of the gospel for missional living. You know, everything we wanted to come into the mind, it must convict the heart. We use the hands for ministry. So this is why we're doing this class. We're not just doing it to build you up in knowledge. There is some real practical application that goes out from this course. And my hope is that you can use this information to really be a light in the darkness out there and just really shine in front of your neighbors and bring people to Christ. So now what we're going to do tonight, bring up what we're going to be accomplishing tonight in this class. I want to look at the syllabus, go over the syllabus completely with you. And after that, we will actually stop for questions. So if you have questions, again, be writing them down in the comments section so that Pastor Rick can ask those. We're going to look at the syllabus and I'm going to explain everything on there. Then what we're going to do is we're actually going to move in and we're going to define a worldview. All right, I'm going to give you definitions of a worldview. Please feel free to take notes. We are recording this as well for anyone who misses a week or something like that. So if you want to go back and look at it, but please take notes. We're going to define a worldview. And then we're going to describe the major components or the major parts of a worldview, and what those major parts are and how they work together. And what we'll see is, this plays into how I was speaking about these tools that you'll use in this class. They're useful for other worldviews beyond ours in the new critical worldview. These different components, they're the same components that go into every worldview. People just have different answers for them. And so let's do this. Let's go over, and I'm going to escape out of here real quick. I'm going to pull up I'll pull up the syllabus. Hold on. All right. So there's the syllabus. You should all have received a copy of this. Pastor Rick sent out, I believe we have a thread on our app specifically for this class, and I believe he emailed everybody a copy of the syllabus. You need this for this class because all of your assigned readings for the class are on the syllabus. There are direct links from the syllabus outside to Google documents that I have in my Google Drive. I was able to get, because I go to Liberty, I have access to their library, their online digital library for free. And so I'm able to actually make a limited amount of PDF documents, put them on my own system without having any trouble from them. Only a limited amount. They don't give me the whole book. So let's go over the syllabus here. Obviously, this is for mission school. It's the Worldview program. I am Ben Kelly. And obviously, there's no cost for this course. We didn't charge anything. So immediately, the approach for this course, this will be delivered via remote learning. Obviously, we're on here. We're not doing this, in person and remote. I am sitting in my den right now, in my library, giving this class to you. So this will all be done over Zoom. We're going to do weekly reading assignments, and they're provided below, and they must be completed each week. So every week, and I'll show this down there below, but there are reading assignments listed for every session. You must complete those reading assignments before you get to class that week. Otherwise, you'll be lost and it won't make sense. So each class is approximately 90 minutes. I am going to stick to that hard. I want to be respectful of your time, and I have timed out my stuff and I practice my stuff so that I am on time. I'm not rambling. I am not, I'm not following a bunch of, rabbit trails. I want to make sure that I keep on time for you and be respectful of your time. So 9 o'clock is going to be a hard cutoff for me, if any of you were worried about that. The classes will primarily be filled with lecture and Q&A. Again, if you have questions, put them into the comments. Pastor Rick is going to read them. All right. I'm going to lecture through slides. And I think I can make those available to you all. I need to look at, I'll need to do a few things like put bibliographies on them, cite sources because they are intellectual property, and put my name on them. But other than that, I can share the slides with you as well if you want to go back and look through those. So the schedule for this class, you want to note that the reading for each section, I already said this, it needs to be completed before you come to class. This means that the reading for session 1 tonight should have already been done. And I believe Pastor Rick got on the thread. He reminded everyone of that. And if you haven't done the reading for tonight, it's not a big deal because it's only 15 pages or something like that. And you'll be able to gather enough from the class tonight, and then you'll be able to go over and do that reading at a different, later this week, and you won't have lost anything. You shouldn't be lost tonight. Now, next week, the week after, you really want to do that reading ahead of time, because if you don't, you will be lost. I am not going to lecture verbatim from the reading. Some of it is supplemental, okay? That means that I have an agenda that I want to cover, and not everything in my class is going to be in the reading, and not everything in the reading is going to be in my class. But you want to make sure that you stay ahead of that. And the reading for next week is a bit larger. There's a good deal more of it. So some of the, like for this week, you're supposed to read A World of Difference, James Sire, and then Major Elements of a Worldview, Ronald Nash. Next week, we're going to be looking at the Christian worldview and how to critique a worldview. So tonight, we're going to break up the different parts of a worldview, and I'm going to tell you how those all fit together. Next week, we're going to look at the information that people put into the Christian worldview. So what does it mean when Christians say they have a theology? Well, what are the major unifying points of theology that make our worldview different from other people's who are outside of the faith? How are we all binded together with that? And so we're going to look at kind of the information that fills in those different parts of each worldview. And then we're also going to learn how to critique a worldview. And that's just done through a series of questions where you ask tough questions about the coherence and the cogency, about a worldview. It should make sense. And when you're dealing with someone who has a different worldview from you, you're able to ask these questions to really, challenge what they believe. There's different tests. There's different logical tests that we can use to challenge a worldview. There's different questions that you can use to challenge a worldview. And we'll be learning about that in next week, in week 2. Week 3, it's listed as the history leading up to the new critical worldview. And like I've said, I am calling all of this stuff, this critical race theory, cultural Marxism, intersectionality, all of this stuff dealing with gender and sexuality, I'm calling that the new critical worldview. That's kind of a term that I've coined myself. No one else is really using that, but for the sake of studying a worldview, that's the name I'm going to be using. All right, so you want to make sure you understand that. We'll be reading a section called Cultural Marxism by a scholar named Robert Smith. It's a article that he posted for Themelios. Themelios is a journal for theology students and pastors. It's readable. It's not like too up there. It's not too, looking down its nose at people. It's very readable, but it is longer. So you want to make sure you have plenty of time to read it. In the 4th week, we're going to look at the new critical worldview. We're going to take the components that we learned tonight, and we're going to fill in the information for each component and what the new critical worldview believes. The reading for that week, now I'm going to go off a little bit from what I said earlier. I am not going to require the reading for the last 2 weeks. And the reason why is it is really difficult to find information that sums up this new critical worldview and how we're thinking about it. I'm kind of pioneering this idea of talking about all this stuff as a worldview and how to analyze it as a worldview. To my knowledge, there is no Christian philosopher or apologist or even a theologian who is doing what I'm doing in this class. And so I don't have any information that really breaks down this new critical worldview. And it breaks it down how we're going to be looking at worldviews in this class. All right. But the information that I did provide, the reading that I did provide, you can use it as supplemental. It's not easy reading. The Postmodernism's Applied Turn by Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay, and then Social Justice Institutionalized, a case study by the same authors. That comes from a book. Those 2 sections come from a book called Cynical Theories. They are written by Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay. They are kind of seen as 2 of the most prominent scholars leading the charge against this new worldview, this new cultural Marxist ideology. They are not Christians. They are adamant atheists. They do not believe in God. However, they have many, many good ties with people who have concerns like we do, especially in the Southern Baptist Convention. A lot of times they will speak for different Jewish synagogues. So they are friendly atheists, as they would term themselves, but they are not Christians. And I want to be very clear about that right away. So we will be reading some non-Christian material in this class. All right. But that's just to give us a perspective of what this worldview is doing. And then last week, finally, we're going to look at critiquing this new worldview. We're going to apply the questions and the tests that we learn in week 2, and we're going to apply it to this new worldview. And I haven't quite thought about how to do this clearly, but I do kind of want to get your interaction as students in on this. So maybe this will be a way where we can have submissions throughout the week, and then I can kind of compile those and get them ready for you. I'm not sure yet, but I do want to hear your voices on that week too. So I'll be thinking of ways to get you into that. The readings for that week, again, they're not critical for what we're going to be talking about that day. They're more to wrap the course up. The Examined Life by James Sire. We're going to talk about his book in a minute, but it's a worldview catalog book. He's a Christian philosopher. It just talks about, how do we go about examining a worldview? And then concluding Unscientific Prologue by Carl Truman. That's from his book that was released last year called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. Truman is a Christian historian. He is also an Orthodox Presbyterian pastor. So great guy. And some of you are probably familiar with that book. It was released by Crossway. I actually have a copy of it here. I'll show it to you in just a minute. But great book. I know some of you in the church are reading it. I would definitely recommend it. But his prologue talks about how do we as Christians go about living in a society that is changing the way it does. And he actually has some very surprising ideas of how we should live. And it really goes back to think how the church lived in the 1st and 2nd century, and not trying to take over politically like some people in the church are today. So that is the schedule. The class is only 5 weeks long. I promise you that'll be enough. You'll be sick of me by then. All right. Real quick, I want to burn through this next page. Course description. This course focuses on philosophical understanding of worldview analysis and how to use such analysis as a tool for the Christian believer in evangelistic and missional circumstances. Students will learn the major components that make up a worldview, how those same components are understood in the Christian worldview, how to critique a worldview, the beliefs that make up the new critical worldview, and will end by critiquing the new worldview. All right. This understanding of worldview analysis will allow students to feel comfortable when encountering elements of the new critical worldview, such as cultural Marxism, critical race theory, intersectionality, and more. So our course objectives are kind of pretty much mirrored in the course description. We want to be able to explain the major components of a worldview, particularly beliefs about God, ultimate reality, and I'll explain all this, so don't worry, knowledge, morality, and humanity. Those are the major components we're going to be looking at. And we want to understand the Christian worldview systematically based on those major components that we listed in the first objective there. Then we're going to learn how to critique all of those components based on a series of tests and questions, because as Christians, we want to make sure that our worldview stands up to tests as well. We want to be able to test what we think, because although our worldviews are generally the same as Christians who go to Sacred Mission Church together, not all of our worldview is the same. There are certain things that I believe that are way down the list of importance that I know you probably don't believe, or we may disagree on, and that's okay. But we have to be able to ask questions to test our own worldviews, which makes us better thinkers, makes us better at evangelism, stronger missional living. It's just all around a good practice to have. And then objection 4, we need to understand the new critical worldview systematically based on the components that were listed in objective 1, beliefs about God, ultimate reality, knowledge, morality, humanity. We want to understand all of that. And then 5th, we're going to critique that new worldview with the tests and questions that we previously learned. Because if we are going to live missionally, if we're going to have meaningful conversations with our neighbors, then we must learn to critique their worldviews, ask tough questions lovingly and gently. All right. We don't want to be jerks about it. All right, we want to build relationships with people, not shy them away from Jesus. And then these last couple parts here, course textbooks. There is no required textbooks here. You didn't have to buy anything. All the reading is linked in the schedule. And so again, if you don't have that schedule, you need to get it from us right away because your reading is linked to the schedule. Additional reading for this course that I put on here. I've got some books right here. I've listed Faith and Reason by Ronald Nash. Ronald Nash is a Christian philosopher. He's dead now. He was Reformed Baptist, so he is very comfortable with the belief system at Sacred Mission. He would be very comfortable with our church. He has very similar beliefs about theology. He actually taught philosophy for a number of years at Bowling Green in Kentucky. He then taught philosophy at Reformed Theological Seminary in Florida. And then he finished his career at the Southern Baptist Seminary down in Louisville. And so, and actually, if you go and you look at the requirements to do the doctoral program in philosophy down at Southern, half of the books that you have to read and be able to talk through at a very high level are books by Ronald Nash. Why more people don't read him, I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm the only person that's ever heard of him. But I talk to professors all the time, and they ask me, who have you been influenced by? I say Ron Nash, and I have gotten many professors say that man was truly brilliant and a wonderful man. So if you are interested in apologetics, this is a book you should pick up. And it's great because Nash has really kind of championed the worldview analysis in Christian apologetics. Another book, this is a book, The Universe Next Door by James Sire. This is a book we will actually be reading from. So anything from James Sire in our course, it comes from this book. It's a worldview catalog. It just breaks down the different components of worldview and looks through like 10 or 11 other worldviews besides Christianity, and it critiques them and asks questions. It's a very useful book. It's written at a layman's level, so it's not tough. Definitely worth a read. I also talked about Cynical Theories by Pluckrose and Lindsay. Not an easy read, but if you have serious questions, if you go through this class and you're thinking, I really want to learn more about this new worldview, about what it's doing at the academic world, in the academic level, great book. I definitely recommend it. Again, they're not Christians, but any Christian who is writing on this stuff right now is putting in their books. They have a lot to thank Pluckrose and Lindsay for help, because like I said, Pluckrose and Lindsay, while they're atheists, they're friendly atheists. They're shaking hands with a lot of Christians right now, trying to get Christians to see the dangers of this new worldview. Another book, Fault Lines by Vodi Bakum, just came out a few months ago. It is about critical race theory and what it's going to do to American Christianity. Bakum is a Reformed Baptist. He was a pastor for many, many years, very comfortable theologically with Sacred Mission. He is now the president of a seminary over in Africa. So he wrote this book from afar, what he's seen happening in America now, and he's quite concerned. So this is a layman's book, very easy to read, not tough at all. Definitely would recommend. If you're looking for more detail, though, it's probably not going to get to the amount of detail you want. Another one, I talked about it, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Truman. Again, not an easy book, but it's worth the read. Very much interested in the history and the thinkers that have built up to where we are now, and what philosophy led to this new cultural movement we're in. And then lastly, where did my did you guys lose me?
We're still here. Your video went off. We see what you're sharing. We just don't see your camera.
Yeah, hold on. Sorry about that. It just shut off. I don't know why. So the last book, a lot of people have questions about critical race theory. I'm a big advocate of going to the source and looking at it. This is a book, Critical Race Theory. It's an introduction by Richard Delgado, Gene Stefanchik. These two are huge advocates of critical race theory. Delgado is probably one of the top 3 scholars in critical race theory over the last 50 years. And so it's an easy book to understand. It's written for incoming undergraduate students at the early college level, maybe to brainwash them, I don't know, but it's very easy to read. But if you really want to understand this stuff, you go to the horse's mouth and you read it for yourself, because you'll just be amazed. A lot of people, when I started looking into this stuff and I would talk to them about it, and I would say the things that are said in this book, they're like, no way, but it's all right there. So if you have questions about it, that's a great book to go into, to read, and just to get an understanding of this kind of cultural phenomenon that's happening right now that is worrying a lot of people in the church. So that is the syllabus. I want to pause to see if anybody has any questions. So Rick, are there any questions?
Yeah, no, there were no questions. Super great introduction. And what I sense from everyone is we're very excited to learn from you, and especially the part about getting into the application, and because this is such an important and timely topic. So we're looking forward to it, and there are no questions. Dan Chaney wanted to extend a personal hello. Other than that, let's get into it.
Hi, Dan, how are you? All right, so yeah, let's do this. Excuse me. All right, so we're going to look at defining a worldview. Hold on just a second. Are you all still there? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I keep losing you. All right, so we're going to look at defining a worldview. And definitions are important because a lot of people use the term worldview, but they don't necessarily know exactly what it means, because it's such a broad definition that we have to set some parameters about it. We have to set out a framework, and that's what we're going to do here. I have 3 definitions for you. So what is a worldview? The first definition, and like I said, feel free to take notes. The first definition comes from John Frame. John Frame is a Presbyterian.
Hey, excuse me. Sorry for interrupting. Are you sharing slides right now?
Yeah. Do you not see them?
We see your video of you, but no slides.
All right, hold on. My bad, guys. How about now?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. So yes, a definition of a worldview. The first definition comes from John Frame, again, Presbyterian theologian and philosopher, great man. This comes from his book, Christian Apologetics, another great book that if you are interested in apologetics, you can't go wrong. But he defines a worldview as a way of understanding reality that governs all thought and life. All right. So again, we see kind of the broadness of this definition. It's not an ideology. It's not a specific set of beliefs. It's something that's governing everything you do in life. Okay. So this is very broad. We want to think very broad in worldview sense. And that's why I said that when we're talking about worldview, you and I may have similar worldviews, being that we're Christians that go to the same church. But when we get to some of the finer details, there's a good chance we're going to disagree on stuff. All right. Ron Nash defines his worldview. His definition is, hold on just a second. His definition is a conceptual scheme by which we consciously or unconsciously place or fit everything we believe, and by which we interpret and judge reality. All right. So a conceptual scheme, again, is something that's governing all of our thought, which we consciously or unconsciously, that's going to be a big thing. Sometimes we hold beliefs unconsciously. All right. Sometimes we just believe things and we haven't really thought through them. We just believe them, all right? And we place everything we believe and by which we interpret and we judge reality. So a worldview helps us judge everything, internalize everything that we come into contact with. It helps us make sense of the world around us. And then lastly, well, come on. James Sire said in The Universe Next Door, he says a worldview is a framework or set of fundamental beliefs through which we view the world and our calling and the future in it. All right. So a framework or set of fundamental beliefs through which we view the world. So I already talked about that. It helps us understand the world around us. But Sire takes it a little step further. He says, he's speaking specifically from a Christian standpoint, helps us understand our calling in the world, what God has called us to, and what our future in this world looks like. So those are very important. So those are our three definitions that we're going to go off. So what we should see, though, is that this is very broad. This isn't something that's narrow. Like I said, it's not an ideology. It's not like some kind of political belief system, all right, that's very rigid. This is very broad. And while the stuff at the center of the worldview we should hold firm to, and they should be the core of what we believe, as we move out farther in a worldview, there are going to be more and more things that you and I, even again, as Christians who go to the same church, we might disagree more on those things as we go further and further out. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that we're believing wrongly or anything. There's just some of it has to do with how we interpret reality. And some of us interpret reality, some of us judge reality differently than others. That's okay. All right. So those are our definitions that we'll be looking at. And one of the things that Sire likes to point out, and James Sire likes to point out, are characteristics of a worldview. And he has 4 characteristics that we need to talk about just to make clear. A worldview is a commitment. All right. A worldview is not just something that you inherit. All right. And that's why if we think about this, I was trying to think through examples. Think about people who grow up culturally in a church community, but they never seem to make faith their own. All right. You'll see this all the time in young people where they grow up in the church, but there's never really a response to any kind of faithful belief. And they end up going to college. They're really just living out their parents' religion. And then they end up going away from the home and they come back and they're totally changed. They don't believe that. The truth is they never really believed what their parents believed. They were pretty agnostic about it. And then they go away and now they're firm enough in their new beliefs to where they say, I reject that old way of belief. The worldview is a commitment. The Christian worldview means we are committed to certain principles of the Christian faith. We believe in the gospel. We believe in the life, burial, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. All right. The life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. These are things that we are committed to. These are things that we just didn't inherit. All right. So a worldview is a commitment. It's not something that we inherit. A lot of times a worldview is expressed in a story or a set of presuppositions. Now, what that means is sometimes, especially in the Christian religion, we express our worldview almost like a narrative, like a story. We talk about the narrative of Scripture and how we fit into God's story, how we fit into the historical redemptive picture of Jesus Christ. We are not the key figures in the story, but we play a part, and sometimes we talk about it as a story. When we do that, we come to the table of, when I say come to the table, that's just a way of saying when we have conversations with people, when we come to the table, we bring certain presuppositions with us. We bring certain things that we understand before the fact. We have certain beliefs that we didn't have to establish through deep thinking or logical equations or stuff like that. Like, we believe in God through faith. We believe in the Trinity through faith. And if you listen to my sermon on Sunday, then we use our reason to study that further. we presuppose certain ideas about our worldview. We presuppose those by faith. So we have to understand that other people who have different worldviews from us, they're acting the same way. They are presupposing things and bringing them to the table. And we have to be very, very careful with how they're telling their story, especially not to offend them or to drive them away from Christ. We have to understand that they're bringing these presuppositions into conversations. Another one is we have assumptions that may be true, they may be conscious, and they may be consistent, or they may not be. Every worldview is built up of beliefs, of assumptions that could be true, but they also could be false. There are a lot of people who have adopted worldviews that believe false ideas. There are people who have adopted worldviews that believe consciously certain ideas, but then they also believe other ideas unconsciously. Some people, for example, and this is a big idea in the whole new critical worldview, a lot of people say that our generation believes racism unconsciously, that we no longer consciously see it as a morally good thing. We actually consciously believe racism is very much morally bad. And as Christians, we say, yes, we agree with that. We believe that man is made in the image of God and that racism is abhorrent. But this new critical worldview would say, well, sometimes people believe racism unconsciously. And this works in other ways too, in different worldviews, but sometimes we believe things unconsciously. We have to work to bring them to the surface. And then consistent. Some worldviews are very consistent. Some worldviews are not so consistent. And that goes into how we're going to test worldviews, how we're going to critique them, how we're going to be looking at them. And so we need to understand that when people have assumptions, they're not always true, they're not always conscious, they're not always consistent. And we need to give people grace when we approach them like that, because they may be operating where they think a belief is true, they think it, or they're not conscious of something and they think it's consistent, but it's not. We give them grace, give them time, be willing to work with people. All right. And then the last assumption, a worldview is a foundation on which we live. And we kind of covered that already, talking about how the worldview is how we interpret reality. It's how we see all of reality around us. It helps us make sense of the world. Well, it's really the foundation by which we live. If the Christian worldview is really made up of core theological beliefs about who God is and what he has done for his people, well, that's the gospel. That is the foundation with which we live on. And without it, we're not Christians. And so we need to understand that for other people who have different worldviews, it's also the foundation that they live on, and that the foundation could be very rocky, or it could be very shifty. It could be built on sand, and it could just be pulled right out from underneath them. Again, we need to have grace. We need to have compassion for people, because there's nothing worse to find out that you've made a contradiction in your belief system. You are believing two things that are contradictory. It's brought to your attention, and then being made to feel, like an idiot from that, being really dragged down from that. That you will never win people to Christ that way. And so we need to be very careful with this stuff. We're going to learn a lot of great tools, but we can really hurt people with them if we're not careful. So we need to move on to what makes up a worldview. And this will be the last section of our class tonight. We're going to look at the different components, but worldviews are often characterized as having 5 to 8 major components or major parts that make them up. All right. Ronald Nash, who we're going to talk about a lot in this class, at least for the first couple weeks, you already know how much I love him. Ronald Nash has a system, and this should have been evident in the reading that you did for him. So this should, if you did the reading, this will sound familiar. Ronald Nash's system is built on 5 different parts: theology, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and anthropology. Now, I know those are words that many of you have probably never heard before, or maybe you've heard them and you have no idea what they mean, that's okay. I'm going to tell you what they mean. I want you to get comfortable with using these words, and I want you to use them because in philosophy, this is the terminology they're going to use. And so if you go on to read any literature that has any basis in philosophy, and they're going to talk about, let's say that a philosopher is talking about how people know something, he's going to talk about their epistemology. He's not going to talk about how persons know things. He's just going to say epistemology. If a philosopher is going to talk about the ultimate reality of the universe, he's going to talk about metaphysics. He's not going to say ultimate reality of the universe, not normally. Now, James Sire in his book, it's written more at the layman's level. He will say things like ultimate reality, and some other apologists do. But I want you to use these words and just write them down now, because I'm going to explain to them, to you, what each one means. All right. And we're going to go through them, but get comfortable in using these because you're going to need them. All right. They're going to be the basis. These 5 components are the building blocks for this class. All right. So theology, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, anthropology. And then James Sire, he builds this. And if you read the reading for him, he builds this through a system of questions. He has 8 different questions that he asks. What is prime reality? And don't bother writing these down. We're not going to use these questions. I want to make an example of these questions and how they all actually fit into the components we just used with Nash. But what is prime reality? What is the nature of external reality? What is a human being? What happens to a person at death? Why is it possible to know anything at all? How do we know what is right and wrong? What is the meaning of human history? And what personal life-orienting core commitments are consistent with this worldview? Now, if you're trained in this, and you will be, by the time we get done with tonight and next week, and especially next week, you're going to be able to see how all of these questions fit into what I just mentioned with Nash. What is prime reality? What is the nature of external reality? Those are metaphysical questions. All right. What is a human being? That is an anthropological question that has to do with anthropology. What happens to a person at death? That's a theological question. All right. It's also a question of anthropology, but you can see how it kind of straddles both, but it's a question of theology. Why is it possible to know anything at all? That's a question of epistemology. When we talk about knowledge, that's epistemology. How do we know what is right and wrong? Well, that's ethics. Most of you are probably familiar with the term ethics. We're talking about systems of moral belief. What is right and wrong? What is the meaning of human history? Is there purpose to our history? You know, that can be anthropology, that can be theological, that can even be a metaphysical question at some level. All right. But you can put these into those different categories. And you know what? And the last one is more of a question of, you know, how do we critique a worldview? But you can see by going through these questions all fit into the categories I just gave you in the previous slide with Nash's system. So we're going to use Nash's system. We're going to use his 5 components of theology, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, anthropology. But anytime you're reading about a worldview and you hear someone like Sire asking these questions, they break down and they kind of fit into the previous components. All right. So that's what makes up a worldview. Those are the major components. Now, let me explain to you how we go into more detail about that. And so theology is our first major component. Actually, hey, Rick, do we have any questions so far?
Not at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Theology is our first major component. Theology, we're going to define that we're going to say every person's worldview will include beliefs about God. Theology is, we'll say, is beliefs about God. And every person, no matter what their worldview, that worldview will include beliefs about God, whether that person believes in God or not. You would say, well, how does an atheist have a theology? Well, he has a theology. He believes there is no God. That's still a belief about God. All right. So every worldview has a theology, and we can differentiate competing worldviews based on a few theological questions. We can ask, does God exist? I already talked about the atheist has theological beliefs. He believes there is no God. All right. That is still a belief about God. What is the nature of God? So if you look and you compare different religions, it will become obvious very quickly that other religions believe God's nature is entirely different than the Christian religion. Even the religions that are close to Christianity, Judaism and Islam, their beliefs about the nature of God are different, especially Islam. Islam's belief about the nature of God and that God can cause contradictions, that God is not personal, very, very scary, very unmoved mover type of God that exacts wrath on people all the time. The nature of God is very different than that of the Christian religion. You can also talk about, is there one God or many? And so, Christianity is monotheism. We believe in one God that exists in three persons, but there are also many other religions that are polytheistic. They believe in many gods. All right. And so we'll have to deal with that. We'll have to deal with, when we're looking at competing worldviews, how does that mesh up? How does a polytheistic worldview, how does it compare to Christianity? How does a polytheistic worldview, how is it cogent? How is it coherent? Does it have contradictions? Can it pass the tests that we're going to throw at it? These are things that we need to be mindful of. Is God personal or impersonal? On one end of the spectrum, for certain polytheistic religions, the gods were just like people. They had all the same flaws as people. If you look at Greek mythology, all those gods are running around doing the exact same horrible things that people are. All right, very personal. Christianity believes in a personal God, a God who is loving, who is caring, who is connected to his people, who became incarnate to be with his people, became a man to be with his people. Or is God impersonal? Is God just some kind of unmoved mover? Does he just put the universe in motion and then it just takes off, and he really kind of takes his hands off from that point? These are important questions, and this will show you, like, when people answer these questions, it'll give you an idea of their worldview and what they're believing. So our first major component, and as Christians, we always want to start with theology, because we do not understand, we cannot make sense of the world without first understanding who God is. All right. We can't understand the world by first knowing who we are. We do need to have self-knowledge, but as John Calvin said in his Institutes, in the very first few questions, he said, we have to know ourselves, but primarily we have to know who God is first, because if we don't understand who God is, then we won't have a true knowledge of who we are. And so we start with theology for that reason. Now, our second component, or second part that we're going to be looking at, is metaphysics. Now, some of you may have never heard this word before. You have, and you don't know what it is, but metaphysics is the study of questions about the ultimate reality of the universe. Where did the universe come from? How was it created? Why is it here? What is it made of? What does it consist of? These are all questions that we have to talk about when we're talking about metaphysics. What is the relationship between God and the universe? You're going to get a very different answer between Christianity and its relationship between God and the universe, and that of pantheism, where God is the universe. All right, and we'll look at that more so next week. We're going to have to talk about, is there purpose in the universe? Does the universe just exist as a brute fact? Was it never created? Has it always existed, like some naturalists believe? Or was it created with purpose? Was it made with intentions for something by a personal God like Christianity believes? What is the nature of the universe? So what is the universe made of? What does it consist of? Is there a spiritual realm to the universe along with our material realm that we possess now? Or is the universe just made up of material chemical processes? And those processes are the explanation of everything that happens in the universe. That's an important question to talk about. Is the universe a closed system? What that means is, is there a heaven and hell outside of our known physical universe? Is there something beyond our known physical universe? Or is this everything there is? The naturalists will say our universe is a closed system. There's nothing beyond that. And what we're going to find in looking at the new critical worldview, a lot of the philosophers who built up the philosophy, who wrote the books that contributed to what we see going on now, very much so believed that the universe was a closed system. There was nothing else outside of it. And that's why they could write so much terrible philosophy that abused people, because there was no consequences to how they treated people. But we'll save that for week 3 and week 4. So these are all questions that we're getting at. When we're talking about metaphysics, we're talking about the ultimate reality of the universe, all right? Something that's beyond the physical. It's not physics. It's not just studying the physical reality of the universe. It's meta. It's beyond the physical reality of the universe. So you need to keep that in mind. You need to learn this word because we're going to use that word in this course. Oh, and is there a supernatural reality to the universe? That was my last point on there. So you can write that down if you want, but I'm going to move on. Is there a supernatural reality to the universe? The next one, epistemology. Now, most people, if they're familiar with theology, maybe they're familiar with metaphysics, ethics, and anthropology. Most people that I encounter do not know the word epistemology. It's kind of a newer study in philosophy. It's only been around for about 200, 300 years. But what epistemology is, it's the study of knowledge. How do we know what we know? It's actually of a great interest to me in the work that I do in school. A lot of my academic work focuses on the relationship between faith and reason. How does that come together? How do we know what we know? And I love reading some of the old philosopher theologians like Augustine, Aquinas, Anselm, because they dealt with this question. They didn't deal with it the way that people do today, but they talked about what is the relationship between faith and reason. And so some of the questions that we'll be asking is knowledge about the world even possible? There's this philosophy, this worldview out there called skepticism, where it says, you may say, Christian, that the world was created by a good God, but how could we even know that? It's not possible to know that. They don't really like, divine revelation. For skeptics don't. So can we trust our senses? We can see, hear, taste, smell. Can we trust those senses to observe the world around us? That's more of a question of epistemology of science. How do we understand observation and stuff like that? But that's a question that's going to be very important when discussing worldviews, because some worldviews say we cannot trust our senses. And so that gets them into all kinds of interesting problems. As Christians, we would say, yes, we can trust our senses, but we don't know everything through our senses. What is the relationship between faith, reason, and sense experience? As Christians, we believe we know certain things through faith and only through faith. We take it upon faith that we believe in the Trinity. All right. We can't that is revealed to us through Scripture. We can't just come to that through reason, but we also believe things through reason. We understand mathematics and logic through reason. That wasn't, I would say that's general revelation. That wasn't necessarily handed to us in the Bible, but we are gifted. We are, as Thomas Aquinas would say, God gives us a gift of grace that allows us to reason. And I believe that on some sense. I don't take it as far as he does, but we believe that. Or can we trust our senses? We as Christians would say, yes, to a certain extent, we can trust our senses. They don't explain everything that we know. They can't explain everything that we know. They can't explain everything we believe. But to a general sense, we can trust our senses. Do we apprehend our own consciousness? Do you ever have people that talk about, am I just in a dream? Am I just imagining you people? Or am I actually in reality? Does this exist out there? That's become an important question, especially with the onset of psychology in the last 150 years. And now we're moving into different conversations about, do machines have consciousness? Do animals have consciousness? So if they do, what kind of consciousness do they have? This is going to be is another important question when breaking down worldviews. You're going to think someone's very strange real quick if he says he doesn't apprehend his consciousness. He thinks we're all, just figments of his imagination. I would ask, how do you know that? How are you conscious of that? But again, we'll save that for a later date. And then, is scientific knowledge the best form of knowledge? There are many people today and over the last 300 years that believed scientific inquiry was the best way to gain knowledge. And there are still some people who are very much in tune with that. There's a belief system out there called scientism that says we can only know things about this world through science. There's a lot of problems with that. I don't want to unpack them here, but that is a worldview out there. That is an epistemology that people use, that many Christian philosophers and apologetics or apologists have turned around and attacked and said, no, I think you're wrong. I think science can't know everything. So that's epistemology. Most of you are probably not familiar with that word, or if you were, you probably haven't heard the word a whole lot. Some of you may have never even come into contact with this term before. It is very important in our day and age when we talk about epistemology. It's going to be very important when we get to the new critical worldview, because a lot of their epistemology is based on how I experience things, how I see the world. You can't know what I'm going through because my experience is my own, especially because you may be a different skin color than me. That's going to be very important when we get to the new worldview and talking about its epistemology. Oh, is knowledge about God, I keep forgetting the last one, guys, sorry. Is knowledge about God possible? So there was a brilliant, unfortunately, very flawed philosopher in the 18th century named David Hume. A lot of people say David Hume was an atheist. He wasn't an atheist, he was a skeptic. He said, I'm not saying God doesn't exist. I'm saying we can't know God exists. Even if God does exist, we can't even know that. So it's a fun exercise when you begin to look at epistemology and you get to interact with skeptics like that. At least I think it's fun. Not everybody is as nerdy as I am. So ethics. Ethics is something that most people are probably most familiar with when it comes to looking at a worldview. Ethics is the study of why certain moral beliefs are right or wrong. All right. And so Christianity has an ethic. There is a Christian ethic out there. Our ethics is grounded objectively in God. God has determined what is right and wrong. All right. He has handed down to us. He has handed that down to us. He has revealed that to us. But not everybody believes that. Out of all parts of a worldview, people are often most informed about their ethics. Some of the questions that we would ask with ethics are, Are there moral laws that govern human conduct? Not everybody believes that. Not everybody believes in moral laws. They may believe in civil laws, like you shouldn't murder people because our government says so, but they may not believe that is a moral law. All right. Are moral laws the same for all people? As Christians, we believe that moral laws are the same for all people at all times throughout history. But there are many worldviews who don't believe that. When we get to the new critical worldview, they're going to say, no, moral laws are constructed by societies. They are not, for all people of all time. And so they're not the same for all people at all time. Is the truth of morality independent of our desires and our preferences? There's a very influential movement in ethics that happened in the 20th century called Emotivism. All right. And it said that we believe things are right and wrong based on how we feel about them, what our emotional reaction is to them. Not that morality, not that murdering somebody is wrong because it's been handed down on high. No, murdering someone is wrong is because it makes me feel bad, because it's ooh, or bah. It's really called, they, in layman's terms, they call it boo or hurrah ethics, emotivism. So it's very much dependent on the desires or the preferences of the individual. Whereas Christian morality is not dependent on our desires or preferences. God does not really care what we think is right or wrong. He is the standard. He has set that. And we'll look at that more so next week. Are morals relative to different cultures at different times in history? Was it okay, so many hundreds of years ago to, let's use a different example. Let's say have, no, I don't want to use that one. I don't want to open up that theological discussion. Was it moral 100 years ago? Well, we'll do this one because it's relevant. Was it moral 1,000 years ago to own slaves? Slavery was very apparent in the Bible. I would say no, it wasn't. It was still morally wrong. But those are the questions that people are asking. Do different cultures at different times in history have different moralities, or are they the same for all people at all time? So let me go back to that just in case you guys are still writing down. So ethics, the study of why certain moral beliefs are right and wrong. And then we are about to wrap up here. Just hang with me and then we'll take some questions. Moving on to the last part, anthropology. Anthropology is the study of the nature of human beings, what it means to be human in the context of a worldview. Now, there's a lot of study of anthropology and studying different cultures and stuff like that. And when a student is an anthropology student in college, they study a lot of different cultures. There's a great plurality of different explanations of what it means to be human and such. When we look at anthropology from a worldview perspective, we're really looking at what it means to be human. Some of those questions are humans free or are they determined? Do we have a level of freedom, or are we just robots that have been wound up? And there's different ways to understand freedom, and there's different ways to understand determined. We're not going to look at those, but we can discuss those sometime at a different date if you'd like to. Is there a human soul? As Christians, we believe that the human person is made up of two parts. There's the body and the soul. But some worldviews only believe that there's just the body, and some Christians believe that, well, no, there's the body, the soul, and the mind, that the mind and the soul are not the same thing. And so those are called trichotomist. I'm a dichotomist. I believe there's a body and a soul, and that's what the Bible prescribes. And then there's monists who believe there's only the body. And when you get into answering these different questions, of, is there a human soul? How is it built? What does it consist of in the human? You're going to get different worldviews based on that question. Are humans only made up of physical material? Like I just said, the monists, they believe, the naturalists, they believe that our bodies are only made up of physical material. There's no human soul. There's nothing else happening in the mind. All it is chemical processes where our brain is reacting. What is the soul or the mind? We're going to get into very different answers based on different worldviews of what is the soul. Is the soul something that is eternal? Is the soul something that is created, or is it something that has existed eternally, like some other religious beliefs hold? Those are going to be questions that we have to ask. And is there a conscious state after physical death? So that's another thing. What happens to us after we die? The naturalist would say, oh, we just die and that's it. As Christians, we obviously won't know. There's more to the story after that. And so other worldviews are going to have different answers to a question like that. And we have to make sure we're asking questions like this to understand the anthropology of a person's worldview. I believe. All right, so that is everything I have for tonight. I know that some of you are taking